Hey, Jacob, have you been listening to the Nebula feed of our podcast?
Yeah, duh. I'm impatient. I want to hear what happens on the show next week, and Nebula gets all the episodes a week early.
Sure, and they get bonus episodes too. But, we still do have to record next week's episode first.
Oh, I keep forgetting we don't live in the future. Hello, and welcome to the Season 2 finale of Something Rotten, our big mini-series on Kane and Lynch and Kane and Lynch 2, Dog Days. My name is Jacob Geller. I'm here with Blake Hester. What's up, Blake? This is definitely our first try doing this.
As the show wraps up, I realize how much I'll miss Kane and Lynch. As people, as friends, as lovers.
I think we're all feeling that in this season finale, where we are going to kind of talk about the series as a whole, what we got from it. We're going to answer some questions sent in from lovely people on Twitter and Discord and whatnot. And then at the very end of this, we are going to say what's next for Something Rotten. So stay tuned for our next series. But to finish up, so Blake, I played both of these games before we started the series.
Yep.
You played them as we did the series, including finishing, 15 minutes basically before recording our last podcast on it. Now that you've had 2 weeks or whatever to kind of like settle on it, do you feel like you have any thoughts that you didn't necessarily have just as you finished?
What is interesting and is, I guess, just by nature of having to be playing the first game at the time, it was taking up a lot of real estate in my brain. And almost as soon as I finished the game, and then in the ensuing weeks, even when I was playing the sequel, it's funny how little I have thought about that first game. Just like it never happened. And then the flip side of that is, so a weird comparison here. When God of War, the remake came out, I played it and I was very hot on it. And my girlfriend, very big into Norse mythology, so she wanted to play God of War to see the world. And I started playing it, and it was very quick that I was not hot on it. It was like a complete 180, and I find that a lot. When I'm hot on something, time will make me cool on it considerably. Mm-hmm. But Kane and Lynch 2 has had the opposite effect for me. Whereas time goes on, I get more and more into it.
I think that makes sense, because in something like God of War, I think, which is a game that honestly I am not a huge fan of, but sure. the joy is in playing it, and everything in that game is so just buttery smooth, and everything has been kind of focus tested to like the most pleasurable gaming experience, that like the fun part is playing it. Whereas with Kane and Lynch, the fun part kind of isn't playing it. We've talked a lot about how purposely not fun to play these games can be. And so I think it totally makes sense that the farther you get from the experience of actually having to control it, the more you would forget about that stuff, and you would remember, the kind of like the things of value that we've been talking about.
But it also, like, in my head feels like an extreme ramp up and adoration of it, where when I was playing through it, I was super hot on it. I was like, this game rules. And as time has gone by, I'm like, that may be one of my favorite games of the last decade.
Like, I'll be interested to like go back to it probably in like a year or so. because by then I'll have been hyping it up in my brain the whole time to see if like then it can live up to the hype that I have created for it. You know, like no one else is telling me this game is awesome, but like I just had such a good experience playing it the first time that like maybe I'll just be in a different place in my life where I'm like not angry all the time, and then I won't connect with it as much.
Sure. Yeah, I would say my thoughts on Kane and Lynch, too, at this point are bordering on hyperbolic. I'm not sure it actually is one of the best games of the last decade, but right now, that's what my brain is telling me.
It's my fun heart, to say, and
yeah, my heart is listening to my brain right now.
I'm glad your heart is listening to your brain. So let's see. We got some. Should we just jump into questions here? Do you have any other kind of like things to sum up? Okay. Well, first we've got at 3thenguy7 who asks a very important question. Are games good?
In general, video games?
Are games good?
I could take or leave video games most days. Now, in respect to the two games we have been talking about for the past 5 weeks, Kane and Lynch 1, objectively no. Kane and Lynch 2, objectively good.
That's we figured it out. Actually, I want to take this is a little bit of a sideline, but I was listening to you on Game Query talking about you guys had a thing where you're doing your hottest gaming takes, and you had a take which was that that one. No, this is not me coming at you. I just think it's kind of interesting that like you know your thing was like game stories are kind of. Even the best game story is kind of like a mediocre TV show or movie that we've been kind of so used to bad video game stories that one comes out and it's like, all right, we're like, it's the second coming. Like, you know, this is the greatest thing of all time. But you also said that that games have the capability to be the best stories. Because of kind of the interactive elements, and I think like most of us have probably made an argument like that at some point. And I kind of disagree with both of those.
Sure.
But
a lot of people do.
I'm interested. I mean, it's like I think that overall you are correct in that in terms of like I think that there are a lot of people in general. I won't even say gamers, but it's like if you're only consuming kind of like the biggest mass market stuff, which I really enjoy, then you might not have a sense of kind of like the heights of a medium. So like Red Dead Redemption 2, a game that I really like. I don't think it's like one of the greatest pieces of literature or, you know, kind of like these sometimes these kind of hyperbolic ways that people talk about it. But I think it compares really well to like, I don't know, the highest earning movies, you know, that if you were like, well, you know, like my favorite movies are, I don't want to like roast the MCU, but it is kind of the fact that like no other movies make any money. And so it's like, well, I love Marvel and Red Dead Redemption 2 is, you know, it's the greatest work of all time.
Yeah.
That can feel more accurate as opposed to like, you know, I love The Beginner's Guide and you know, whatever weird ass indie movie you want to call like the height of the medium. You know, there's greatness to be found on the margins.
To unpack this take a little bit, because it's simultaneously a complex take and a reductive take.
Yes, it is.
I mainly mean AAA games, because by and large, those are the ones put on a pedestal. You know, for good reason. They're selling the most. They have the biggest ad campaigns. They're in your face the most. And the ones that are touted as the height of storytelling in the medium,
the Schindler's List of video games, if you will.
Exactly. Well, speaking of, I find even with those, the stories I like the most in those, Last of Us Part 2, for example, I've written about why that game resonated with me so much, and I liked it, despite understanding why it didn't resonate with people and why they didn't like it. I think even a story like that I was very engaged with, felt some emotional attachment to, pales in comparison to the writing of a movie I don't really like that much, which is Lady Bird, which is also touted for its writing and story.
I mean, that is a really good movie that you don't like that much.
Exactly. I'm not saying it's not a good movie. I'm just saying I don't like it very much. But when I think about the writings and like stories in those, somehow a middling movie for me always stands out as a better example of these things than the best video game.
It's funny that you've chosen, and I am gonna bring this back to Kane and Lynch, I promise, but like it's funny that your middling movie is literally like a multiple Oscar winner.
Look, I went to Catholic school my whole life, and it was just like I was watching like footage of my own life in that thing. It was like a documentary.
I guess my question for you is in terms of, and maybe there's a separation between writing and experience here, but like if you have, my guess is that you don't cry at every movie or kind of find every movie to be a metaphor for addiction, like with what you wrote about for The Last of Us 2. Like, if you have that experience with something, is that not inherently kind of making it a powerful story, whether or not you feel like it's kind of objectively well written? I hate to use objectively, but I feel like you've kind of made a separation here between like what is good writing and what is writing that affects me, or I would probably argue that that separation doesn't really exist.
I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but in regards to The Last of Us, what I took from it as this allegory for addiction, and I think I put it in my piece, was that I was projecting onto it, and I didn't think that game was trying to say that. But also, like, I think my take is inherently flawed in that it's looking at these things as objective, like this writing in its objective form or this performance in its objective form is better than this writing and performance in this different medium. So it's a flawed argument from the get-go that I now have to argue in a sincere form, which is, really not working out for me. But
I think it's a good... You go ahead.
I guess it's just like, and this isn't like helping my argument, but it's just something I feel. Like when I play something and I'm like, that is the best of this genre in video games. Mm-hmm. It's still something in me when I watch a movie and I'm like, that was pretty good. I usually am like, the movie is the better version of the storytelling, or the book is the better version. I guess a more direct comparison is Last of Us 2, revenge movie. If you were to make me choose between going through the bleak revenge tale of The Last of Us 2 again, or the bleak revenge tale of Sympathy for Lady Vengeance by Park Chan-wook, Last of Us should be slapped for even thinking it's on the same pedestal as something that good in that medium telling a similar story. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. I mean, I don't think that you are the one putting those two together. I don't think that they would say aha, we've made something to rival. I mean, maybe they would. I don't know. Druckmann is pretty complimentary of his own work.
But I think that also comes down to the way people talk about those two things. Like, The Last of Us 2 is considered by a lot of people, whether that's right or wrong, to be the best in the medium of storytelling, right? Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, in the revenge drama, considered one of the best ever told. So it's like, if you're throwing around the words best and they have similar themes, your brain is naturally going to compare them. And I don't think something like The Last of Us 2 even comes close to something like a Korean revenge drama. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. And I think so we could talk about this forever.
That don't know,
but
hold on. For listeners that don't know, Game Query, a very crass joke podcast, and now I'm being forced to argue for something I said I pulled out of my ass and threw into the ether that I was hoping would not come back for me.
No, okay, so here's the reason that I brought it up, is that this is something that I have thought about this a lot, and not in a way that I disagree with you. The kind of like do I just like love games so much that I want them to be kind of at the same level, and I'm kind of like saying that they are to make it reality even if they're not? And that's kind of an unanswerable question. But the second reason that I brought it up is Kane and Lynch 2, which is a game that both of us really like.
Yeah.
And I think a game that neither of us would argue has particularly good writing. I mean, I kind of don't even know what that is, because there's not that much like dialogue in the game, but I do think the scenarios they go through are interesting. Whatever. How does Kane and Lynch 2 exist in a larger media landscape? Like, would you tell someone who doesn't normally play video games that this is an interesting artistic experiment, or do you think it's only interesting if, like us, you understand the language of video games so well that you can tell when this thing is kind of doing something different?
No, I think when I talk about Kane and Lynch too, I have to talk about it often with caveats. Like, I'll tell a friend I really like it. Like, a friend that's in the game industry be like, I really, really love Kane and Lynch 2. I think this is a great experience. And then I'll be like, you shouldn't play it. I don't think you would like this. You know what I'm saying? I do think, like, if you were to look at the game, even if you didn't have such deep knowledge of the game industry, but you knew what Mario and Fortnite and Halo and Call of Duty were, you could still look at that game and see it's doing something different and or interesting. Whether or not you're into that aesthetic is a totally different thing, and I think it's understandable when people aren't into it. But I do think when you look at Kane and Lynch 2, like, I think if I showed it to my dad, he could identify that this is something different and it is something unique. And then it just comes down to whether or not you're into that whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. And so then, it's like when you if we were to put Kane and Lynch to, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with like comparing mediums or whatever, but it's like we had Max Payne 3, which was a game that was so clearly obsessed with movies and like wanted to be kind of seen alongside movies, and so took so much language from film that it was probably to its detriment, which is kind of the Rockstar story of like, we want to be like a movie. And I don't know if, Kane and Lynch 2 is so obsessed with film that it seemed like literal film, like the stuff that you record on, that it kind of feels like it's also in that same conversation. But at the same time, it doesn't feel nearly as much like it wants to be Man on Fire or whatever.
I think what's interesting about Kane and Lynch, too, is what can make a bad movie with an interesting camera idea still worth watching. Like I think there was a Paranormal Activity that, like a late Paranormal Activity, that a lot of it, or maybe the whole thing, was told through like laptop Skype interface. Or maybe I'm thinking of a different
that's
movie.
Unfriended.
Okay, so
which actually there are a couple movies that have done that, but Unfriended is a good one.
Okay, so whether or not that movie's good or bad is beside the point. That idea is cool. You know what I'm saying? Like taking the camera and doing something radically different with it. And so when I think about Kane and Lynch 2, the story I don't care about. Like, it's fine. Like, the story is dudes fuck up, dudes gonna run away from their problems, and that's pretty much it. And then there's some bad, like, Irvine Welsh knockoff writing in it. But, like, what that game went for and where it took its inspirations are what I find fascinating about it, and what appeals to me, and what I think is worth praising about this game is because a lot of games, and I think you can consider this a AAA game, like, they take so much of their visual language directly from film. I think it's sometimes a problem in games, the way they try to, like, people have talked about this for years with Uncharted, the way, like, are you playing a game or are you playing a movie? You know what I'm saying? Kane and Lynch 2 takes its visual design and language from another medium, but it's not movies. It's something not even a ton of movies outside of found footage do, which is Live Leak and YouTube and this weird digital age we're living in where, you know, like there's not as big of a separation between documentarians and just normal people with an iPhone anymore. And like taking that language and dropping it into a video game and finding ways to incorporate it into the cutscenes and even into the gameplay, I think is what's so cool and interesting about this game. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
No, I think that's a really great point, and I want to. There are kind of a couple. Probably the most direct one is Devin Raposo, who said, you know, like, what lessons can modern games learn from the Kane and Lynch series, and kind of in regards to the ugliness and the nihilism, should they? I think it's kind of wild, and I really haven't thought about it until you just said it, that almost all games are kind of emulating film, like cinema, and not, you know, the way that we film things in our everyday life, you know, the way that cell phone videos look, and maybe it's just hard, you know. The only things that I can really think of are like Her Story and Telling Lies, you know, those games that are like completely webcam, because that is a way I am talking to you on a webcam right now. Like, I do a lot of that in my normal everyday life. But like, I would love to see, maybe it's like a Fatal Frame or something, like something where you are filming. Seems like it could be really interesting. Well, what's that game called? The horror game Outlast. Had the kind of like camera footage thing, but I do think there's an interesting separation between games like Fatal Frame or Outlast, where sometimes you look through a camera, and Kane and Lynch, in which the whole thing, the whole time, is through a camera. And I would love to see more like found footage-esque games. I think there's a really cool interplay between those genres.
In respect to Devin's question, the nihilism and violence of it, I don't think necessarily is something I care whether or not is adopted by other games or should have been adopted by other games. I personally like that kind of storytelling. I understand why people don't. What I wish people would have taken from this, and I don't think many have, is just fucking going for it with cameras in video games. Like, another example that comes to mind is the opening title sequence of Devil May Cry 5 and some of the stuff in Metal Gear Solid 5 where
Metal Gear Solid 5 camera is so cool. Oh my god, I've been talking about that forever.
They're shots that, granted, I've never made a movie, so maybe I'm speaking out of my ass here, but they're shots that look impossible to make in a movie. Like, you can only do it in a video game because it's not real, you know? I mean, I guess you could CG it in a movie, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, it's an interesting point that you bring up, because that's a conversation that's had in movies a lot. You know, when Life of Pi won Best Cinematography, people were like, well, there kind of wasn't even a camera, because that whole movie is completely a green screen. And so it is an interesting question of like impossible camera movements, but I think in games it is kind of cool. And that, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm really attracted to that in a video game is when I'm seeing a cutscene and I'm like, this could never exist in a movie outside of them CGing it, which, you know, I guess what's the separation there? Because the video game, they're faking it, and the CG, they're faking, but that's neither here nor there. Kane and Lynch 2, not on the same level, because there's no impossible shots in there, but it's trying something different. Yeah. That I find fascinating. Similar to something like Devil May Cry 5, where it's like, I would never see this in a movie. That makes it different, and it makes it interesting to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there's a really good kind of one of the reasons that we have fixated on such kind of like individual points of Kane and Lynch 2's design is that it is not afraid to draw attention to itself in a way that I feel like there are a lot of games that kind of want you to not think about anything, you know, maybe it's like we're trying to get all the systems out of the way, and so the play experience can be as smooth as possible, and like that's fine. But I like I'm like actively thinking about an element of a game's design or aesthetic or whatever. And Kane and Lynch 2 is not trying to get anything out of the way, because it's like if you got everything that you notice out of the way, this game would be Kane and Lynch 1, which sucks.
Yeah.
That has no defining features. And so, the fact that they are like, not only are we making this design decision, but like, we are really going to make you notice that we're making this design decision, I think is really cool. And it's something, again, that you see way more in indies than in big titles like this.
Yeah. Developers.
Moving on from that, there are a couple questions that kind of get at the same point, which is Zolty Boy asks, if Kane and Lynch 2 is so good, why isn't there a Kane and Lynch 2 2? Great question. And Emmett Watkins Jr. Asks, why do you think games with ugly themes like this fell out of style this generation? And if games like these could make a comeback, what devs do you think could pull it off? And these are kind of different questions, but I have a similar answer for both of them, which is kind of that I feel like mid-budget. You said this was AAA. I would maybe call this AA, which are all these are distinctions that we've made up.
Yeah.
But I think that something that bums me out in games, and one of the reasons why all of the potential games we've talked about for this series were kind of made between like 2005 and 2013, is like there are not many small to mid-budget games. It feels like every game is either massive quadruple A, the biggest thing in the world, or a little indie hit. And sometimes those indie hits like hit big enough to kind of it's like Fall Guys, feels like it could be a mid-budget game, but really that's just a small game that got super lucky and got big. And I feel like one of the reasons that you don't see games like this, that you don't see Kane and Lynch 2, is because this takes more resources than a micro-budget game, but could never have the audience of a quadruple A. And so then it's just kind of stuck in this weird limbo, and I feel like games like that don't really get financed anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you see it occasionally. Like the Tony Hawk remake is kind of that, and like Hellblade.
Yeah, but that's a remake, dude.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess Hellblade, is kind of in that vein.
and Hellblade, notably, Ninja Theory, like, called themselves AA. That's like the thing they were going for.
You could say some of the Yakuzas that have come out recently fit somewhere in their judgment.
Maybe there's more of a space in Japanese development for
definitely.
Than the kind of big American stuff.
I think you're probably spot on with why there was never another Kane and Lynch 2. Like, I don't think they ever released sales numbers for this, but the game was never going to perform well. I mean, I know some of the IO developers have said in interviews that the game didn't do well without providing raw data, but like this game was never going to be a hit.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how good it is, no matter how much I want to praise it, I'm not dumb enough to say that this game should have been a hit, because there's no universe where this game ever warranted the commercial success to see a Kane and Lynch 3.
Do you think, here's a weird question, and this is probably something that neither of us have experience with, but like, do you think that they knew that? When they were releasing this, were they like, we know this isn't going to sell super well, so we're just making it for us, kind of?
I think so, and I don't know if I'm reading between the lines of a specific quote or projecting on it, but Rasmus Paulsen, in a interview he gave, talked about how the Jeff Gerstmann controversy with the first game and the fact that that first game was bad kind of had a lot of people against them from the beginning. At least that's what they felt like making this game. And so they were like working from a deficit in that respect. So they were like, fuck it, we're just going to make this crazy thing we want to make. I think if I'm reading between the lines of what he's saying there, it's like, yeah, we know no one is going to, even if the first game sold really well, no one fucking liked it. So no one's probably going to show up to buy this. Also, this whole Jeff Gerstmann GameSpot thing happened. So everyone on the internet fucking hates us.
Right.
So yeah, I think they probably made that game knowing that it was not going to be a hit. For sure.
So let's get to the kind of second part of Emmett's question, which is devs you think could pull it off today. You actually mentioned Ninja Theory, which is interesting. You know, like they do a lot of different stuff. I would kind of like to see their take on some. I mean, Hellblade is a pretty. I think we could. I don't want to call Hellblade a rotten game because it's really about something very meaningful, but it does fall into the category of games that are deliberately hard to play. You know, games that aren't meant to be just like cool and fun.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I'm going to say this and everyone listening is going to groan and probably turn this off, but I'd see what Naughty Dog did with it, you know? I'd see where they went with it.
This is an insane take.
I don't know, maybe someone like Hangar 13, because I thought Mafia 3 was such a Shakespearean tale of violence that, like, maybe if you added more drama to this series, like, it could be really interesting to see where they took that.
Yeah, well, and I think I've tried multiple times unsuccessfully to play through all of Mafia 3, but I think probably most people's takes would be, I definitely wish this game had a smaller scope, and maybe if they had a small enough budget that they could not make it a modern open world game, you know, that they had to do something else. And honestly, I don't even, you know, if they had a smaller budget, maybe they would have the same genre and it would just be worse. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to have the really clear, you know, storytelling ambition and attention to detail and like all of these cool things that Mafia 3 has without having this just go to all the locations on your mini-map thing.
Mafia 3's examination and portrayal of violence and revenge is some of the best I've seen in a big budget game, and I think like their hands on the wheel.
How would it compare to Park Chan-wook?
Better than The Last of Us Part 2, that's all I'm gonna say. Pales in comparison to my man Park. But it would be cool to see them take on these, because Lincoln Clay is by video game logic justified in his violence and revenge, and the game does examine how he's being destructive with that, but Kane and Lynch are not justified. It would be interesting to see them tackle characters on the other side of the coin, because even though the game Mafia 3, you know, kind of puts a magnifying glass to what Lincoln's doing, you're also, as the player, supposed to like feel like he's on the right, doing the right thing here for a lot of it. And if you play Kane and Lynch 2 thinking that, you're a fucking idiot. So it would be cool to see them tackle that, I think. So that's my answer. Hangar 13, Mafia 3, great game.
Finally, you know, Emmett says, what other genres could you see a game like this working in? Which I think is a great question, because we both of all three of the games we've done have been third-person gun boys. You know, that's what genre this is in. And so could you see something, you know, outside of a shooter happening? Like, does the game... Here's a question, and I don't think you've actually played this, but, like, could a game with this vibe exist as, like, a Disco Elysium style, you know, CRPG? Like, where it's all writing and dialogue and really well written, but all of that.
Where I was thinking was like a stripped down brawler, so not something that's a brawler in the sense of a Yakuza where there's deep like skill trees and RPG mechanics, but like a hand-to-hand focused game on the scale of something like Hellblade, where the violence is very intimate.
So The Quiet Man is what you're thinking of.
I didn't play that.
Wait, but do you know of The Quiet Man?
Like, I know what it is.
The insane Square Enix, like, terrible game. Is it honestly, maybe we could cover it, but like legendarily bad.
I know what it is. I know it sucks, but like I think like if you just stripped away the guns and made the violence more intimate and kind of made it like a brawler, I think it would be interesting.
That's hold that thought for our next series, I think. Yeah, I mean, you know where this is going, but for the audience, we'll leave you in suspense for that. Okay, so here's a really cool question from Mike Spam, which is, I'd be interested in seeing you guys try and interrogate what would be necessary to have a throwback game designed to be an homage to the mid-aughts dark games, like what you guys are covering, which we have been, I think, struggling to answer with, like, what kind of dev and what genre, but, like, yeah, are there things... You know, for example, I have been playing through... Let me just jump off here. I've been playing through Dante's Inferno, which I've been texting you about, which is honestly a really cool game. But I have just been thinking, even though that game was not made that long ago, the separation in graphical quality from then to now would make this game, I think, maybe impossible to make today, because it would be literally nauseating in, like, the things that they're depicting. And I think a lot of this game, you know, Max Payne is kind of the exception, because Max Payne is a very good-looking game. But just in terms of graphics, I feel like there is this kind of space where, like, they were good enough that you could accurately represent human forms. They weren't like Final Fantasy polygon, you know, characters, but they weren't so realistic that they removed all the abstraction. You know, that there is still a little distance. And I feel like that is really important to this kind of game.
I think my brain took it a different way. And to make a game that works and, you know, is like Something Rotten Season 8 or whatever that we would tackle, stop making violence in games fun. Like, something like... You can tell me your game is an examination of violence all day long, but if Sun He Legend is making fucking GIFs of it on Twitter, then is it? You know, because you want that violence to be cool and look cool and be fun.
I don't know, dude. I mean, I think that dude could probably make some pretty crazy-looking GIFs of Kane and Lynch, too.
Sure. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's these games that come out and... they want to be like, oh, this is Kratos really examining his violent past, and then I play it and I'm like, yeah, but why does it feel better to do the more violent stuff in this game? I don't know. I think that this is maybe us stretching, or I don't want to speak to you. I think that sometimes I say stuff like this, but then it's like, Max Payne 3, an unbelievably fun game. Kane and Lynch 2, a big reason that I enjoyed it more than the first one is it was way more playable. Like, that it felt better to play. So I don't know, you know, Hotline Miami, we've talked about a bunch of times. That game is really fucking fun. You know? As someone who did not feel that Kane and Lynch 2 felt good, but still loved it, part of it was not liking to play it. It felt shitty. It looked shitty and it felt shitty, and that worked for me. And I don't know if that just was because my computer sucks, but like, granted, I played it on Xbox for a bit too, and it felt terrible. But like, I don't know. Like, okay, so maybe it's not the feel of the violence, but like, even these games that like dance around as meditations on violence oftentimes still want the violence to look so cool. And Kane and Lynch 2 doesn't. Like, I never saw a violent act in that game and was like, yeah, it's kind of cool, though. Like, when, you know, Kratos is like, I'm so sad, I'm angry, and then he rips the jaw off a werewolf, and it's like a QTE. It's like, what are you, like, you're undermining your statement, in my opinion, in that way. And so, to make a game that would fit the SR mold, I think you just stop like fronting this violence is bad and we're going to examine it, but it's going to look so fucking cool. You know what I'm saying?
I guess I don't know if I totally agree, because I feel like what's hanging, the specter hanging over this conversation is Last of Us 2. Because while I agree that Last of Us 2 can look really cool when you put cool gifs of like Molotoving a dude on Twitter, that's not how I think it plays. And I do think, I mean, for me personally, playing through that game was pretty stressful and miserable. And when you shoot someone in the gut and they just lie on the ground and scream for like 45 seconds, like, you know, I think that game is trying really, really hard to not make its violence fun. And I kind of don't like where it lands. And so I feel like these games are almost less introspective. You know, that they feel like they're just so kind of raw is a word that I've used a lot in this series. But they feel raw, and Last of Us 2 seems like someone like sat down for hours and was like, how exactly are we going to make the violence not fun for the player? You know, and then these games are just kind of like, I don't know, I feel like that conversation wasn't had in development. Like, I don't think Kane and Lynch 2, they were like, how do we make this not fun? It just kind of happened, you know?
I think where this conversation maybe can't proceed is that I thought The Last of Us 2's combat was really fun. And, you know, I've tried to unpack why I am not as bothered by hyper-violent content as I should be, and that's a whole other conversation. But, like, I feel like we're just going to butt heads right here, because for me, like, I was mad into the combat of that game. I had a really good time, like, figuring out how to work within those combat arenas. And so, but because of that, and maybe this is my own fault, like, I have a similar view of that game's statement on violence that I do God of War, where it's like, okay, why are you trying to tell me this, and then you make your game so fucking fun to play?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That I want to kill these people. But, so, that may be a fault of my own there, but also, in my head, we make another Something Rotten game, like, make it suck to play. Like, make that...
I think maybe what we're both trying to get at is what we would call, like, in a review, polish. You know, that The Last of Us 2 and God of War are, in game terms, incredibly polished games, and most of the games, Max Payne 3 probably excluded, most of the games in this category do not feel polished. You know, they feel kind of first takey, you know, that they just, like, got all their ideas out coded, and then they, like, ended there rather than putting the layers of playability on top of it.
I don't disagree with you, but I also don't think that's where I was coming. That's the place I was coming from.
We are allowed to feel differently on things also.
Yeah,
we don't have to come to a conclusion.
I think for me, it's more the idea that, like, sorry. I think for me, it's more the idea, and I'm sorry I keep using God of War and Last of Us Part 2, but I'm playing God of War again right now and recently played Last of Us Part 2. Those games have upgrade trees. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I agree with you on this. Get the fucking build a RPG shit out of here.
Well, God of War has combos and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, Last of Us 2 has, like, upgrade trees that make yourself more of a fucking American badass. Shout out to Zach Frazier. But that's, like, to me, it's like, you're trying to make me a cooler killer. And in Kane and Lynch 2, I'm not upgrading my shotgun. I'm just, like, fucking, half the time I'm running from the 5 guys left in a level because I'm like, fuck this. I cannot handle this right now.
I think that these games, here is a really specific thing that I genuinely think is important. I think when you pause these, like, rotten games, they should have resume and options, and that's it. Like,
sure.
I don't want fucking XP. I don't want lore. I don't want like extra readable shit. Like, it's just like the game is the game, and that's all there is to it. And that is something that doesn't exist anymore. You know, that every single game has just like upgrade trees and all that bullshit.
And to that point, that's what we effusively praised about Kane and Lynch 2, is it got in, got out, and didn't fucking waste your time, you know? So that's where I come down on it, is kind of just strip all that shit back. You know, what is God of War without all of that? And it's just Kratos swinging an axe. Is it something better? Does it make that statement not feel hollow and vapid? What is The Last of Us Part 2 if I can't set booby traps around a level and want to share videos of my best kills.
Yeah, I mean, what are both of those games if they're not 30 hours long?
Oh, God, yeah. God of War 2
I would say
so
better. But
God of War especially. Oh, my Lord. Let's play God of War on Season 4.
So I think we've answered. There are certainly more questions here, and you've got this drive doc as well. So tell me if there are any that you really want to answer. I feel like a lot of them on kind of like Kane and Lynch's influence and like, you know, if Kane and Lynch 3 was going to happen, what would you want? Are kind of things that we've touched on throughout the series. Is there anything here that you want to, you know, that you want to dive into?
I would like to do the 2 I think we have left, because I was trying to think today, like, are there any games that Kane and Lynch directly influenced, and outside of, like, Hitman Absolution, I came up a little empty on that. I don't know, maybe the Hotline Miami games, but I don't know.
I swear to God, I can't believe that I can't remember this. I was watching something where like it was a dev talking and they listed this as a, like, that Kane and Lynch 2 was, they had just kind of like, here are the games that influenced our style, and Kane and Lynch 2 was one of them, but I can't remember what it was. Here's a weird fact. This is on the Wikipedia. The producers were sued at a court in Beijing for vilifying the Chinese people.
Oh, well,
I mean, that kind of thing seems to happen with depictions of China a lot. I do think that this game is kind of tourism in a place that you can kill a different race. You know, we haven't talked about it that much, but like, you know, it does seem like what they wanted to do was make a game where the character was out of their comfort zone. And like Max Payne 3, they chose to do that by putting you around, making you a white guy and putting you around a bunch of not white guys.
I'm not trying to excuse or sidestep this conversation with Kane and Lynch 2, but I think, like, if we unpack that, you have to unpack so many video games, and we kind of did that with Max Payne 3. Like, you have to examine the Far Cry series and
I mean, and I will, you know, that's something. And we also talked about this last week, but it is, you know, as I think it is silly for China to sue IO, but I don't think that there's nothing to the fact that this game is just kind of like murder tourism.
Sure. You want to do the last question? I liked it.
So if Kane and Lynch 3 were going to happen, this is from Brett Owen.
Oh, no, my bad. Who would you want making it? What would you want them to achieve? We already answered that.
Yeah.
I meant, does the morbidity of Kane and Lynch add or take away from the gameplay design? Because I don't know. If you would have asked me last week, maybe I would have said the morbidity is crucial. But now that I'm sitting here today, I'm like, I think my love of this just comes from the camera. I think that's apt, you know, because I would have said, like, no, this game's got to be violent. But I feel like here's a kind of crazy comparison. I think that Kane and Lynch 2 has a lot of vibes in common with Uncut Gems. Oh, sure.
You know, it feels completely chaotic and unhinged, and like you're just hanging on. Uncut Gems does not have that much violence. You know,
maybe
it's got
more. Maybe to your point, maybe more Good Time.
I haven't seen Good Time, so I can't make that comparison. But what I think my point in bringing that up was that Uncut Gems to me feels like a very violent movie, but in reality there are not that many scenes of violence, you know, and it doesn't. That is certainly not a game in which the hundreds of people that you kill in Kane and Lynch, you know, are necessary. Yeah. And so, yeah, maybe you could, if you just made a game with this camera and the kind of series, like the the vibe of like panic and the series of unplanned events that unfold in Kane and Lynch.
Yeah.
I think you could actually achieve a similar effect.
Sure. I do also think this game's style like just invites morbidity and works within it. You know what I'm saying? Like if they shot this game and it was scenes of birthday parties and people being stoked, it wouldn't work. But like when you see this game's aesthetic, cool. Sure. But when you see this game's aesthetic and you're watching intense violence, like it does make sense to you. But I don't know that like I think you have a really good point that if this game was like telling a similar story to Uncut Gems, like I think it would still work. I don't know.
And also, it depends on how you define, an easy way to define morbidity is like literal body count. But I think that you could also probably say that Uncut Gems is a lot about kind of like who gets to live and die. And so, you could probably still have those themes, and maybe that would, it's hard to know exactly how to take the phrasing of this question. I feel like it's always going to be about disconnection and death, but it doesn't necessarily have to involve the kind of video game language of mow down 400 dudes.
Yeah, and I think, but also, like, it does work for this game. I would say it doesn't necessarily add or take away from it. It works, and it is what it is, and there's plenty of other ways you probably could have done this in a less violent game.
Right.
Jacob doing a big yawn.
I did a big yawn. So I think I am happy with the questions we've answered. I think we have probably covered these games more in depth than anyone else on the planet at this point.
I'm so bummed we're moving on and we can't use our theme song anymore.
It's a great. Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll just stick with it because I can't think of much music from the next game. And Blake, you want to tell us what that next games are going to be?
Condemned, baby, Criminal Origins, and Bloodshot. Games I've wanted to play for a decade or more and never have, so I'm excited.
Yeah, so we're dipping into horror because we are going to do Condemned, Criminal Origins, and
I don't mean to
Condemned, Bloodshot.
I don't mean to pre-take, but I think I already have a take brewing about this game and something I'm not going to like about it.
Okay.
I'm not going to put that on the episode, but I've done some research about this game, looked into what it's about, and I'm like, ooh, I hate that big time. So we'll see.
Well, yeah, I've played the original Condemned once when I was a kid, and then I started playing Condemned 2, and I remember finding it too scary to continue, and I didn't finish it. So I'm excited to do that. Just for some logistics, the first one is available on Steam. The second one is backwards compatible on Xbox, according to Blake. It is not anywhere on PC, so I am going to attempt to emulate it, and I guess I'll update everyone on how that goes.
Mm-hmm. And for the sake of listeners, this will not be coming out the following week after this episode.
Yeah, we're gonna take a little break. We're gonna chill out for a while.
Which is, I mean, it's how we did Max Payne. We took some time between Max Payne and Kane and Lynch, so that's probably how Something Rotten will just operate in the future. We'll do a season, month or two off, do another season. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm sure it'll be 5 episodes. I'm sure we can find some cool guests. You know who I think loves that first game?
Who's that?
Leo Vader.
Hoo-hoo.
Let's fucking
Video
go,
essay extraordinaire. Leo Vader.
And he's something rotten, I'll tell you what.
Well, I can't endorse that view. But anyway, Blake, thank you for being with me through this weird and frequently really frustrating video game series. I mean, we have talked almost exclusively about Kane and Lynch 2, because guess what? Kane and Lynch 1 fucking sucked. And neither of us enjoyed it or really have anything else to say on it, I think.
Yeah, it's a game so bad it's forgettable, which makes it worse, you know? Like, it's not even bad in the way that I'll remember it.
Yeah.
Which
It's nothing. On one of my favorite podcasts, Blank Check, they use the phrase "a movie that does not exist" for like a movie that came out and then just has made no cultural impact and doesn't mean anything to anyone. And while Kane and Lynch 2, I think, had a large, if kind of subtextual impact, Kane and Lynch 1 doesn't exist, and no one ever, I think, would reference that as like a formative game for them.
Hey, really quick. I just checked Twitter. We had 2 come in. Tay Paris asks, have you decided what you're doing for Season 3? Yes, we're doing Condemned 1, Criminal Origins, and Condemned 2, Bloodshot. But we have one last question here from Brutus Beefcake.
Oh, this is a big question.
Is there any real artistic value to the murdered girlfriend trope?
I think we can answer this fairly. we can put this one to bed. Sure. I don't want to give the impression that I never think it's okay to kill a girlfriend in a piece of fiction. You know, like my criticisms of the trope are not to that. They are more so that in these games the trope is only ever, you know, the trope is motivational for the dude you're playing as. You know, and the kind of there are 2 ways that violence against women happens in these games, and it's either to make the main character motivated, or it's just to inform you that a place is bad. It's kind of women as set dressing, as I think the how Anita Sarkeesian has referred to it, where it's like, it's not saying that the violence is good, but also the only reason we're murdering this lady is to show you that this is a bad place to be. So, you know, just kind of like being a little more thoughtful with what you are doing to your characters, and making people characters. Might
surprise no one listening to this show, but all the games we're playing, written and directed by men.
Shocker. Let's
wrap it up.
You know, that's it. My name's Jacob Geller. You can find me on Jacob Geller at Twitter and on YouTube. That's me. Blake, how about you?
Metallica's Rad on Twitter, where I'm dropping all my hot Tony Hawk takes. Got a 30,000 plus word article dropping in November. Check me out then.
Woo! All right, that's it. We're done, baby. Season 2, Something Rotten. Thanks for listening.
Keep on rotting in the new world.